All right, let's party. So, what up, everyone? John is going to be running the party. John, could you just give a brief background on yourself, and then we could just roll right into it?
Sure. Yeah. So my name is Jonathan Pope. I own a training facility in Denver, Colorado. That's where I met Chris. He interned with me, 3 or 4 years ago. Um, I also write and coach for Precision Nutrition for anyone who's familiar with them. I've done that for the last 8 years. I co-authored a book called Building the Elite, where we go in depth about talking about training individuals for special operations selection programs. So we've been doing that, me and my business partner, for the last decade. And we've had a really high success rate. In most of those programs, the failure rate's anywhere from 50 to 90%, and our success rate's been over 90%. And part of that's been, a large part of that has been due to the process that we've gone through in terms of understanding the interaction of physiology and psychology, because most of the reasons why people fail these selection courses has nothing to do with their physical capability. Even the most fit individuals, there's some recent research on this. So even the people who scored in the top 5 percentile points in terms of physical capabilities on their PT test when they begin a selection program, still only have a 1 in 3 shot of passing. So that means those guys failed. Even the most fit individuals failed for an emotional or psychological reason an overwhelming majority of the time. So being fit is a prerequisite to making it through these things, but it's only the first step. And what we found, over the last 10 years of working with coaches in all these different parts of the industry, because again, I work Gen Pop on behavior-based nutrition coaching to special operations guys, is that as coaches we tend to focus purely on the physiological side of things and getting people bigger, faster, stronger, moving more effectively, whatever it may be, and we don't really appreciate the interaction of psychology when that oftentimes is going to be the limiting factor or the deciding factor in how successful somebody's going to be. And so that's what I'm going to talk about today, is kind of the interaction of stress physiology and psychology, and how that changes how you adapt and how you're capable you're going to be, and how training is the perfect medium, the physical training that you guys do, to develop those underlying skills.
Hell yeah. So you're going to give a presentation that you initially give to Altus, and then we can go into more of an open discussion.
Yeah. So I'm just going to roll through the presentation. Hold your questions. There's like no words on the slides, but I can share it with you guys. I have a lot of presenter notes that will have all the notes that you'll want. But just hold your questions, because a lot of the questions that probably will come up early in the presentation I'll answer later. But it's just, we wrote a book on this and it's 400 something pages long. This is going to be a 40-minute presentation, so I can't only go in so much depth. So hold your questions, then I can answer any other questions you guys have at the end. Cool.
Perfect.
All right. Let me share my screen. We'll get going. Start this presentation. Maybe. Screen. All right, can everybody see that? Yep, cool. All right, so I already did my intro, so I will continue on. So one of the things that people think of when they think of psychological performance is this concept of mental toughness, but it's really ambiguous in the research. It doesn't really mean much beyond this concept of goal fixedness. So I've got a pretty good story here. So one of the guys that Craig, my co-author, is good friends with, was a medic, like a MARSOC medic, and he was assigned to a sniper selection course. And part of the selection course is that they call it skull dragging, where guys go out to the field and they have to move from point A to They have to move around essentially without being detected by the cadre. And him being the medical officer, he has to give a brief at the beginning to tell them about any potential things that could happen. And the medics in these circumstances are kind of looked up to because their entire job is to keep you safe. So when he says something, people take it very, very literally, and they hold on to that. So when he gave the brief, they were in a desert area, and they told them that there's snakes around here. So if you're skull dragging around and you get bit by a snake, to try to keep the snake if you possibly can, so that we know if it's venomous or not, and if it is, that we can give you the correct anti-venom. So about 15 minutes in to this exercise, he sees a guy jump up in the air like he's doing a burpee and then slam back into the ground. And then he's like, what the hell was that? And then like a couple minutes later, over the radio, a guy comes up and says, we've got 10 snake bites. He's like, what do you mean? We have 10 guys with snake bites? No, one guy, 10 snake bites. And so this guy had been going through on his stalk, and he had come upon a rattlesnake, and he tried to back up. And when he did that, he moved too quickly and the thing bit him. Well, he didn't want to jump up because he was really fixated on finishing this thing because he's in the middle of a selection course. He can't fail. So he's trying to do two things at once. So now he needs to capture the snake, but he needs to finish the course, which is to not get detected by the cadre. So the snake bites him, and he starts trying to wrestle the snake, and it keeps biting him over and over and over again and bites him in the face. And he finally is like, well, this damn thing's not going to die. So he jumps up, lifts it over his head, and slams it down. And that's what the person saw, was the guy doing the burpee with the snake in his hands. And so they finally get up to him and find him, and his face is swollen and everything. And he's like holding this giant rattlesnake on his chest as they load him up. And he would not let go of the snake until the doc said, hey, you can let go of the snake. It's okay. And so this is like a perfect example of what mental toughness actually is this idea of goal fixedness. So this guy was so obsessed with finishing his two primary goals, which first was just to finish the course, but secondarily was to, once he got bit by the snake, was to capture that snake. But it was stupid. He was so fixated on the goal that he wasn't mentally flexible enough to realize, like, okay, as soon as I got bit by the snake once, the first thing was out the door, and I don't need to keep getting bit by the snake. If I've seen the snake, I don't need to capture the snake and get bit 10 times in the process, okay? So it was this concept of mental toughness by itself, or goal fixedness, doesn't actually lead to great outcomes, whereas, for a lot of the pop psych and stuff out there, that is the thing that people will fixate on. So this concept of being really resilient, really capable is a lot more nuanced than simply just being really tough. Being really tough oftentimes leads you to really bad situations, and this is a good example of that. So resilience is really what you want. And again, resilience is another one of those concepts that's thrown out there a bunch at pop psych, and people don't really know what it means at all. And resilience is really an outcome. It's a set of a bunch of underlying skills and abilities. But the good news is that all of these things are trainable. And as I mentioned before, physical training is the perfect avenue through which to try to develop these psychological traits. Because when you're doing physical training, you're going to put people in stressful circumstances. And stress is the primary medium through which you develop these underlying these traits and these skills. Again, they're very plastic in nature, and they're trainable. And so the more resilient you are, in this general concept of resilience, the best way to think about it is that you learn in difficult situations. So it's not just that you survive them, it's that you're constantly adapting and modifying your approach based on the information presented to you. So we go back to the snake bite guy. He was not capable of doing that. He was so fixated on his goal that he couldn't think in the moment, and he was just going to finish the damn thing no matter what. And so while you need a guy who's really mentally tough, you also want somebody who can be adaptable and change their approach based on the information presented them in the moment, okay? So let's talk about stress physiology. So stress isn't a bad thing, but you do need to manage it. And stress is largely an opinion or your response to a situation. And so that response can be modified through training. And so there's two primary stress responses when we're thinking of, from a training perspective, how we're responding to a difficult situation. And just remember, these things occur on a continuum. It's not a black and white thing. So, you can have shades of one or the other. But on one side of it, we have a challenge-based or a eustress-based response. So this is the type of response that you generally want during a training, whenever you're doing any kind of training, physical training, or even the type of thing that you want when you're doing some type of psychological, like if you're in school or something like that. Because when you have this, you have a stress response, you have this cascade of hormones that are released, but you only have so much that you still retain access to your prefrontal cortex, or that kind of executive part of your brain. So you can still make decisions and modify on the fly, okay? So this is ideal because you recover really quickly from this. If you have a really strong, call it threat or a distress-based stress response, then you have a lot more cortisol that's released into your brain. When that happens, again, then it takes a really long time for your body to clear that out. And if it's a strong enough stress response, you start to lose access to the prefrontal cortex, or the thinky part of your brain. And so this is when you're just performing. So this is when somebody gets so stressed out that they say they couldn't think. They're not lying to you. That's exactly what happened. All you're doing is reacting based on the stimuli in front of you. So that's not necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes you want that in certain circumstances, when someone's performing on a really stressful situation. But in general, when we're thinking of training, we want to keep people more on that challenge-based side of things, okay? And stress is both cumulative. So over time, if I think of stress responses, they accumulate. So if I do a training thing and I have a stress response, so I'm in the middle of a workout, okay? And then it takes a little bit to clear that, and then I go again and I go again, I can accumulate the amount of stress hormones in my body. And as it gets higher and higher, then I'm going to move more and more closer to those threat-based stress responses. So it's cumulative and progressive in nature. And so the main thing to keep in mind here is there's two things that control your stress response. And again, these are opinions. These are purely based on your basically analysis of whether or not you have a sense of predictability of the situation, or you have control over the situation. It has nothing to do with your actual control or the actual predictability of the situation. And so we'll talk about this when it relates to special operations guys in a second. So predictability is just knowing what's about to happen, and your sense of control is having the feeling that you can influence the outcome of any situation that you find. And so these are things that happen all the time. And so you can start paying attention to this in terms of your clients, if you're a PT or if you're a coach, because you can start listening to their language, where clients come in and they say, oh, well, I can't, basically they kind of fall into that, I can't do anything about this. This is what's happening to me. So they'll say things like, oh, this workout's really hard, and this is how I'm feeling. And you can tell whether or not they actually feel as though they have any sense of control over the thing. And we'll oftentimes modify the amount of predictability they have to amplify the stress response or to reduce the stress response. So in training, we often use what are called open-ended workouts. And I'll do this even with my Gen Pop clients, where we have an hour-long conditioning session and we start going and say, I'll outline what a circuit is, for example. And then everybody, what is the first thing they want to know? How long am I doing this? How many rounds? And I won't tell them. So it depends. If there's somebody who can't handle that and it's going to amplify their stress response, and it's going to lead to really bad outcomes because they're going to start to spiral downward and not be able to handle themselves, then I'm not going to do that. But if there's somebody who I know can manage it, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, I'll have direct their attention in a specific way to manage this more effectively. It's a good way for me to work on some of these, to help them improve their sense of control, even in a situation where they don't actually have any predictability over what's about to happen beyond just what the workout itself is, okay? So again, getting back to it, those are the two main things, is your sense of predictability and control. And again, they're opinions, and they're assessed during this initial stage. So typically what happens is you have it's called the orienting response. So this is anxiety, okay? This is when you start thinking about something that's difficult and you actually start to have the stress response. And so when someone feels anxiety throughout a day, they are actually having that stress response. But if they don't actually do something afterwards that's mentally difficult or physically difficult, they're having this cascade of hormones that are released, but then no way to actually, again, you kind of burn through those hormones and utilize them for something actually useful for that person, okay? And so that's where anxiety can be really helpful if you're actually preparing for something difficult. And during that anxiety stage is when your brain and you decide whether or not you have a sense of predictability and control. So again, this as a coach or as a practitioner is where you can orient people and start giving them, and we'll talk in just a second about this, how to specifically focus on those two things, okay? But this is also why anxiety is really damaging for people over time, is because they're having a stress response, but then nothing is happening afterwards because they're imagining that something difficult is about to happen to them. And your brain doesn't know the difference between thinking about the thing and the thing actually happening. So as soon as you have that anxiety response, your hormones are released and you're off to the races. Okay. So as I mentioned before, stress is cumulative and progressive. So as it adds up, what ends up happening here is that if you have like a really, really strong stress responses, that you start to lose access to that thinking part of your brain faster and faster. Whereas if you stay more in the eustress-based stress response, then you have a slower accumulation of stress. That means you can do more things before you start to lose access to that thinking part of your brain. So when we think of this in terms of training, the stronger your general stress response is, that means you have less accumulation of specific stress. So when I go and do a workout, what we're primarily focused on is getting a specific stimulus, right? You're going to go train somebody and you want to help them get stronger, run faster, be more powerful, have more coordination on something, whatever it is. If they're having a really strong general stress response, you're not going to get that much quality work in before they just fall off and they're going basically in their kind of habitual automatic part and they can no longer learn and adjust, if that makes sense. Whereas if I can stay in that eustress-based model, that means I get more specific stress, less general stress, and that therefore I get a much stronger actual adaptation response to my training. And again, that's going to be purely based on your ability to manage the stress response. And so psychology plays a big role in that. So the main way you're going to do this is through attention. Attention is like a spotlight in your mind. And so there's three types of attention that we're going to look at here. So metacognition and metaemotion. That's what we've been talking about. That's just thinking about thinking or thinking about feelings. So this is giving people a different way to think about things. Okay. The second one is self-awareness. This is like looking backwards. This is understanding your tendencies. And so we'll talk about some questions in a little bit that you can use as a practitioner to help people start to understand the way their own mind works. So that most people are just responding to the stimulus in front of them and they're not aware of why they're responding that way or that they have the option to change that in the future. Okay. And then the third thing is mindfulness. And this is what people think about when they think about meditation. That's just focusing on your internal stream of consciousness in the moment. So that's like present thinking. Okay. So we have thinking about thinking, looking backwards, understanding your tendencies, and then being able to pay attention in the moment. And mindfulness is really helpful because this is how you're going to help people change the way they think in the moment when they're doing a training session or when they're doing whatever you're working on with them. And so the way I direct this is through asking questions. And as soon as you start asking questions, people start paying attention to their internal dialogue, what they're thinking about, what they're feeling, what their expectations are. And then as soon as they have awareness, then they have the option to change it. So again, coaching is really just all about using attention in a really skillful way to help people understand more about themselves and then change these patterns. Okay. So as a coach, you can help your people learn these tendencies by asking them, why did you do that? What were you thinking? What did you tell yourself about X? And again, they can start to learn what they were anticipating before something. Afterwards, after they do something, or beforehand, you can ask them like, during this next exercise, I want you to pay attention to your internal dialogue and tell me what you're thinking about why you're doing this thing. And you'll start to learn a lot about people. And again, they'll start to learn about themselves. So the idea is that you want to just create these feedback loops. So as soon as you start asking those questions, they'll start paying attention. As soon as they start paying attention, it opens up a dialogue. They start learning about themselves. And then you have the option, or you have the ability for them to change their strategies. So I'm sure you guys know a lot about pain and fatigue, or you're learning about this as you go through school. I'm not going to go like in the actual detailed models of these things. The most important thing to know is they're more similar to emotions, where both pain and fatigue don't necessarily indicate physical damage. that they are just physical sensations and they may indicate something bad happening, but most people cannot differentiate whether or not the type of pain or the type of sensation they're feeling is actual damage occurring or just a sensation that's based on an expectation because it's something they've learned in the past and they've associated with a specific movement. So the biggest thing I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole here. You guys are probably going to learn a lot about this. I'm sure Chris has had other people talk about pain and fatigue. But the first step is they just need to understand that just because they're feeling a sensation doesn't mean it's necessarily a bad thing. And then the second step is that they can change their experience with that by shifting their attention and their expectations during any training exercise. And so again, they can control their experience of pain and fatigue by shifting their attention. So let's talk about some specific mental skills. So these are going to be the ways that you give people a sense of predictability and control. You shift their attention away from just automatically whatever they're doing in the moment and get them to pay attention to the things you want. This will help reduce their sensations of pain and fatigue. When you do that, you reduce the stress response, you maintain that eustress response, and you help people become more capable over time, and you start shifting their experience to the things you want them to focus on, as opposed to the things they've learned to focus on, which oftentimes are not helpful for their performance and how they're feeling on a day-to-day basis. So self-talk is a big one. And self-talk tends to fall into one of two categories, normalizing or catastrophizing. So normalizing is more non-threatening. It's something like, I've been here before, I'll be okay, just focus on X. Catastrophizing is more threatening based, where it's, this is terrible, I can't finish this, I don't want to be here. And so one, you're amplifying your pain and fatigue and stress response. And the other one, you're reducing that stress response because you're not having a reactive emotion based on that thing. And again, most people are completely unaware of their internal dialogue in the moment. And so simply orienting people to start focusing on thinking about what's going on in their head as they do something, they'll learn a lot about themselves. And so as a practitioner, the most important thing you can do is to be non-judgmental, because most people will tell themselves that it has to think that they, like, my internal dialogue should be positive. I should be telling myself, rah, 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 this is awesome. And that's not true. Even just shifting your attention to something completely neutral is really, really beneficial. So if they're in their head and they're beating themselves up and they're fixating on how much it hurts and how bad this sucks and how much they don't want to be there, then they're amplifying their stress response. But even if they can just shift their attention to something like a song or song lyrics or something completely neutral that's going around them. So as a practitioner, this is easy, where you can just shift their attention and tell them to focus on some performance point. And as soon as you do that, they get out of their own head and they start focusing on the execution of the task, as opposed to how bad this sucks or it hurts or it's uncomfortable, right? Or you shift their attention to their breathing or something like that. And that's completely neutral. It's not positive, but by shifting their attention in that way, you reduce their stress response automatically, like right away. So some good coaching questions here are like, what are you telling yourself? What do you believe is about to happen? That's a really good one if you feel like the person has a lot of anxiety going into whatever you're asking them to do. And that's usually, it's pretty easy to pick up as a practitioner if you've been around people for a while, just watching their body language. And then after something happens, ask them, why did you do that? Especially if you see somebody not performing well, giving up, having negative body language. And again, sharing your own experience and being very inquisitive and non-judgmental on these things is really helpful. Because if you don't have that trust first, then people are just going to lie to you about it. All right. So the next one is self-hurting. So this is the concept of our choices don't just reveal our preferences, but they shape them. So the more often you're able to shift someone's attention to use a specific strategy, that means they're more likely to do the same thing in the future. So it's essentially that your brain is always learning. Okay. So as soon as you start changing somebody's strategies for how they're coping with anything, then they have a tendency to repeat those internal narratives or those strategies over and over and over again, especially if you're shifting them more towards that kind of stress response, because then they're actually capable of learning. They're not just in performance mode. As soon as they go to performance mode, they're not really learning anymore. They're not taking up new sensor information. They're just reacting and using whatever strategies they have in their head. So once you create that feedback loop, it becomes easier and easier and easier. And this is why maintaining a skill is always way easier than building the skill initially. So as a practitioner, that's the good news. And that's what you can tell people is that, look, we're going to shift our attention here. We're going to work on this thing. And as you do this once, it becomes easier the next time and the next time and the next time. And so some ways of doing this is just to break something down with like little mental cues. Like one of the things we tell our guys is this concept of quit tomorrow. So whenever they feel like shit, is that we tell them to just tell themselves to quit tomorrow, because they're going to have some really bad moments if they're going in special operations where they just feel awful. And the hard thing about these selection courses is it's completely devoid of the two things we just talked about, predictability and control. They literally have no control over anything around them. They have to do what they're told nonstop. They never know what's next. No one gives them an agenda. The only thing that they know is that this will eventually end. And if they don't quit, that they will make it through the thing. That is all they have. Okay. So they have to be masters of managing themselves. And so it's completely devoid of positive feedback. They can be given a task and absolutely crush it, and the cadres say nothing. In fact, they might just berate them for the smallest little thing. Okay. So you have to be able to manage yourself completely in these circumstances. And the only way you can do that is by having built these mental models ahead of time. And so one of the things we tell them all the time is when they're feeling really bad is that they can just quit tomorrow. It doesn't matter how bad they feel today, as long as you make it through the day, you get to quit tomorrow. And oftentimes what happens is that gets you through the hardest time. And then the next day you wake up in the morning and it's not so bad anymore. You're not in the middle of that worst moment of your life that you were just in. Okay. And you didn't quit because you had this mantra of telling yourself you quit tomorrow. And then you've practiced that now. And now it happens again that day. You have another worst day of your life and you tell yourself to quit tomorrow, and it becomes easier and easier and easier to make it through these really, really difficult things. And so you can frame this based on whoever your audience is, different mantras. Like one of the things we use at my gym all the time is I tell people every fucking day. And so like if people are bitching about stuff, I tell them like, it doesn't matter. You just have to show up and do the work every fucking day. Like just do the work. Sometimes you just have to, we call it like chop wood, carry water. It doesn't matter how you feel about the thing. You just show up and you do the task, even when you don't want to do the thing. And the more often you do that, you get in the habit of doing it. When you're in the habit of doing it, it becomes easier and easier to do it, even when you don't feel like doing the thing. So you can create whoever your population is, like you just have to get to know them. But that's one of those things that we use. And we had like a client who passed away this past summer, who was like kind of one of the main people at our gym, who was really positive. And obviously it was like really difficult for our community, but we've used that because she was probably the most positive person. We've like just this amazing human being. And so whenever anybody's bitching or complaining about stuff, I just tell her to like think about Sarah, and it like immediately shifts the attitude like that. And again, it's just like these little cues. And the more we do that, it's changed the culture quite a bit, because it gets people to orient and focus on the things, like practice this concept of self-hurting. Okay, so let's keep moving. So segmenting. So this is a really helpful one, especially if you have somebody who's going to be doing something that is difficult for them and they struggle. There's somebody who feels overwhelmed with the task in front of them. And so I was just talking about this with special operations guys, is that they have this huge process that they're in the middle of. It could take anywhere from 6 months to 2 years for them to get through this pipeline. And so that, especially when you're just getting beat down every day, is like hard to wrap your mind around. And so we get them to break their day down into the absolute smallest chunk that they can manage. And so oftentimes the harder the thing is, the smaller that becomes. And so it could be during a workout, like, hey, just make it to the end of this set. That's it. And so instead of focusing on how much more they have to do and how bad this is going to be, which amplifies their stress response and reduces their sense of predictability and control, they focus on something that's small and that they can wrap their mind around and they know they can get through. So it could be just getting through the next few reps. It could be just finishing the current exercise. It could be finishing the set, whatever it is. If they're doing endurance work, oftentimes we'll have people like focus a point, like find a point in the distance that they can get to and say, hey, I just have to make it to this point. And as soon as they make it to that, okay, I just have to make it to the next point. And this is one of the things, like I do a lot of ski mountaineering, and part of that is oftentimes you kind of know where you're at on the mountain, but it's like a mind fuck, because there's like oftentimes you're like, oh, I think this is the spot, and then it's not, and then there's another spot, and there's another spot, and so like, you know, you're on these like massive days, like 12-hour plus days, and so I just focus on like one little spot. Like I'll choose a point, but okay, when I get to there, then I'll be fine, and then I just focus on the next point, the next point, next point, so on and so forth, and before you know it, you've like found your way to the top. So again, regardless of whatever your population is, you just have to focus on these small things. And the best way to figure this out is just ask questions. So you can ask your client, like, especially if you notice that they're feeling anxiety, or if they say they're overwhelmed, or this feels like too much, it's like, okay, well, what is a manageable amount of time or distance that you can wrap your head around right now? And then again, because it's all self-assessment, this is all opinion. This has nothing to do with objective reality. It's their assessment of what feels like they have a sense of control and predictability over. And again, by breaking things up, you help improve that for that person, reduce the stress response, which helps you get a much better session from them. So compartmentalization. So this is the ability to recognize thoughts and feelings and set them aside in the moment to do what must be done. And so compartmentalization is really helpful. The first step here is just acknowledging how you're feeling, okay? It could be acknowledging the emotion that you're feeling, be acknowledging the physical sensations that you're having. Whatever it is, Craig gives us really good, who's my co-author, story of this, of a guy in selection. It was during Hell Week at Bud's, which is really awful. And like halfway through, like 3 days in, they get like a 2-hour break where they get to go sleep in the beach, like in a tent. And it's kind of like a joke. It's a break, but it's not really. And he was helping run that course. And he just distinctly remembers this guy getting out of the tent to go use the bathroom. And his whole job was basically not to let the guys pee on the sand and actually go to the bathroom, because they're so tired at that point, they don't care anymore. Even though they're going to be literally rolling around in that sand like an hour later. And this guy got out of the tent and like did like this whole body shake and just said, fuck, I'm cold. And then just, that was it. And then walked off to the bathroom, and that was it. And that's like a perfect example of compartmentalization. Like he acknowledged that he felt terrible, that he was freezing cold, and then that was it. That was the end of it. It didn't matter. This is how I'm feeling, onward. And so that's acknowledging how you're feeling about something, that something hurts, that you don't feel good today, you don't have energy, you're not in a good state of mind, but it's irrelevant. Okay, great. This is how I'm feeling. Now I'm going to move to the next thing. And this is really helpful, especially when it comes to feelings, because then you're no longer ignoring the underlying emotion that you're having, but you're acknowledging that thing, and that's okay. Like you're not demonizing it. Again, you're kind of normalizing that emotion or that feeling that you're having, acknowledging that it's present, but that it doesn't matter and it's not going to impact what you're about, the work that you need to do. So again, you can pay, as a coach or practitioner, you can pay attention to body language and ask your clients these things like, what are you telling yourself? How can you shift your focus to the present? And just starting to get them to acknowledge and just pay attention to the sensations that they're having in their body and the emotions that they're feeling, and that it's not a bad thing to have those mental states or to feel those things, but it also doesn't mean that you don't have to take action. Okay. So, and again, by practicing these things, getting back to the self-hurting, the more often they do this, the better, the more skilled they become at it, the better they're going to manage their stress response, the better outcomes you're going to get as a practitioner. So the last one is visualization. So everyone kind of knows what this is. The most important thing to think about with visualization is that the more realistic it is, the more helpful it is, okay? So you can't just sit there and think this is a really broad concept. Typically breaking something down to the absolute smallest bit that you struggle with is really, really, really helpful, okay? So it's fixating on the exact specific details and then going through that. And by mentally rehearsing this thing, you're increasing your sense of predictability and control, because you're going through it over and over and over again in your mind. You're paying attention to the mental cues you're going to give yourself, to the physical sensations that you're going to have, to how you're going to cope with those things and deal with them. So this is really, really, really helpful. when you're done in conjunction with action. So you can go through these feedback loops when somebody does the thing, and you have them mentally rehearse it, and they do the thing, and then they mentally rehearse the adjustments they're going to make, and then they do the thing, and they go back and forth. And by doing so, you mentally get way more reps, but you physically only have to go through the exercise the appropriate amount of times. And this can enhance learning pretty significantly. Again, as long as they're full in on it. So it has to be actually realistic. You have to really think about it and focus on, so guiding people through this. So if anybody has done meditation, this is the difference between doing self-guided meditation and guided meditation, okay? When you do your own meditation, you're just sitting there, it's really difficult, right? As soon as someone starts guiding you through the process and helps orient you into the specific place, the mental state, the right questions, the music, the posture, the breathing, they're coordinating all these things, are basically creating this visualization process for you and guiding you through this process, okay? So as a coach, you can help people do this, especially if there's somebody who you're not going to get that many reps with because they might have a physical limitation where you just simply cannot stress them that many times, but you want to get more practice with the thing. All right, and then the last thing here is stress inoculation. So stress inoculation, it's just this process of managing stress as the primary modality or like measurement of how you progress things over time. So as we talked about, stress is progressive and cumulative. So it's the main thing that you need to keep in mind as you're training people. Again, whether you're a physical therapist, strength coach, whatever you're doing, you need to focus on the amount of stress that someone's under, because our goal as coaches or practitioners is not to just create physical capabilities, but to make sure that they're doing so, that they're getting enough stress to adapt effectively, but you're not overstressing them. So they'll still get an adaptation, but it'll take a lot longer to recover from. And so the main thing to remember here is you just don't automate skills too soon. So they should be right at the edge of their ability where they're doing things perfectly for the most part. They're rarely failing. And you're doing that by managing intensity, duration, and complexity. And the main thing that you see most people do is they automate skills really soon. So they go and see their PT, they're working with strength coach, and they say, good enough, right? And then they add a lot of stress, okay? Because the main thing is to get more fit or to progress someone on their PT spectrum and get them to some whatever objective outcome that they supposedly have, but they automate the skill really way too fast. And they don't focus on the quality of the thing as the primary measure of how they're progressing things. And then as soon as you start adding too much, again, intensity, duration, or complexity, you can't, the only way to rebuild the skill is to go back to the fundamentals and go up from there. So when you're teaching people, the primary thing you need to remember is that you have to manage the overall stress response if you want to help people become more and more capable over time, and that you need to build on success and avoid adding stress too soon or too much complexity as you're taking people through this training process. So that is it.
That was awesome, man. Thanks for making that as concise as possible. I know your book is thick and it's more nuanced than that, but we can open it up to questions. I will hold back because I worked with you, so I hope other people have questions.
I have a question. So with that last part with the stress inoculation thing, I know you said like the skill acquisition is probably going to be dependent on the person, right? So is there like any general way you set up like markers to say like, okay, this person is doing successful, or do you ask the person, like, what does that look like in actual practice?
Yeah, I mean, it totally depends on the skill that you're working on. I mean, obviously you as a practitioner are going to decide what the technical proficiency is where it needs to be, right? So I think as a practitioner, that's you. But then subjectively, it's also going to be like, are they feeling the right sensations in the right places, right? So that's where I have to ask questions, because it might look right from just looking at like biomechanically, oh, how's that movement look? Okay, great, but are they feeling the tension and the right muscles and the right engagement in the right places, right? And so that's where you have to ask the person. And those are cues that you get back to them, like, hey, as long as you can feel X, that means you're being successful. And then that's where you allow them to start having some autonomy and know what is success versus what is not. Because most people fixate so much on these external things of like, especially you see it in the gym, just getting more weight. And it's like, okay, cool, you did more weight, but who the fuck cares if it was done terribly? And you're going to reach this molehill, but you're avoiding, and then things are going to fall apart. So you see people automate a skill too soon, right? And they're back squatting 135 pounds, and it's this atrocity. And by doing so, they're limiting their long-term potential. Like they'll never get heavier than that, right? Or else it just gets worse and worse. Whereas if they back up and revisit the underlying primary skill, focus on an easier movement, and practice that for a while, the first time they go to back squat, like we do this all the time with our guys, is they literally don't get to touch a barbell for 6 months. And the first time they squat, they like hit a PR in 2 weeks, because as we've rebuilt the underlying fundamental movements from the ground up, we didn't automate too soon. By the time they actually go to that, what they think considers hard, then the underlying movement is so dialed in because we didn't automate too soon that they are way more physically capable than they were before. And we didn't really make them stronger per se. We just allowed them to express the actual potential that they had, if that makes sense. So it's a back and forth, right? It's you as a practitioner guiding things, but giving people cues to know when they're actually being successful with something. And the biggest thing is you have to figure out what people's motivation is for why they're going to care about doing that thing the way you want them to do it. Okay. Because a lot of people don't care. They just want to go through the motions. Like, okay, well, why does this matter if I feel this thing working in the right place? So like, I'm just here to get a workout, or I'm just here to do my PT. I'm doing the exercise. What does it matter? Right. So you need to figure out what matters to them. Are they in pain, and do they not want to be in pain? Do they want to be more fit? Are they training for something specific? Whatever it is that matters to them, you need to orient the thing you're having them do to that outcome. Like there has to be a direct connection. And as soon as you establish that and get buy-in, then they'll start doing what you want them to do.
So you talked about like segmentation, and when it's too big, you love to break it down. What do you do like in the opposite when like you have a hard time with them getting started and stuff? Like they have a fear just the opposite end, just getting started. Can you talk about that a little bit?
I mean, it's the same thing. Like you need to, when people struggle to get started, like PN is a good example. So I work with Gen Pop and generally not very motivated people. And oftentimes it's like, I'm giving them like a really easy workout and like, I just can't get started. So then we break it down to a trigger workout. So it's literally like, hey, twice a day, you're going to do 10 bodyweight squats. Like what is the smallest possible thing that you are 100% confident you can do? And as soon as you do that thing, because this kind of gets back to motivation, is most people think they're going to wait to get motivated. And there's some things you can do to help kind of like tease out what their motivations are, their underlying motivations are. But in general, motivation comes from taking action first. So people who take action start to feel good about the things they're doing, and then therefore they start feeling motivated. So action comes before the emotion, okay? So you have to act your way into feeling. That's a good way to frame it. And so getting them to take action, however small it is, will get them starting moving in that right direction. It creates positive momentum. It's kind of that self-hurting concept. Oh, I did it yesterday, I can do it today. And again, as long as it's small enough, and then a good way to do this is confidence check. Just like, hey, on a 1 to 10, how confident are you? And if they're not a 9 or 10, it's too big. Make it smaller. Does that make sense?
Yeah, just relative to each person. That makes perfect sense. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's 100% opinion. Like that's the thing, is that when we're dealing with psychology, it's their interpretation of situations. And so as a practitioner, you have a lot of biases as any human being, you know, and so the only way to help yourself escape those and help your people is to have these mental models and structures in place that get you to understand the people that you're working with. Because it's hard. Like I really struggle. Like I don't really relate to a lot of my clients and the things that they struggle with. And because that part of my life I've spent so much time focusing on and building. So what they consider hard to me is like the easiest thing in the world. But I've spent 30 years focusing on those things, like 25 years. It's a lot of practice, right? So what, and that's true for anybody in any field, but things that they might consider really easy in different parts of their life, I might consider really hard. So we're all experts in different parts of life. So the more you can understand that and appreciate that and like take that step back, that helps you not get as frustrated with people and just be more curious and learn about them. The more you learn about them, the more you're going to be able to figure out kind of what makes them tick and help them take action.
I was hoping maybe we could like talk through kind of an example. I think like Juan was touching on this with just applying this to different population levels, because I can wrap my head around this when it comes to even like obviously like non-military, non-professional, but like athletes that came to me with the goal of getting stronger. Like they sought me out. But now that I'm working in outpatient PT and I'm getting people kind of that are there because they, you know, don't necessarily want to be, but they're here and here we are, and they're like super sedentary, have zero background in any kind of movement at all. And so I'm kind of simultaneously trying to like increase buy-in for them to just get therapy, but also insert like these aspects of just like, you know, not having fear of discomfort, that kind of thing. So like, you know, the older lady that literally like leaves her house to go to church and doesn't want to walk up the stairs leading with her left leg because it hurts. So she always uses her right leg. You know, how can I like distill this down to meet her there? Because if I'm like, you know, chop wood, carry water, she's gonna be like, what are you talking about? I don't even know what that means.
Yeah. I mean, again, you just have to break it down to what matters to her. So she wants to go to church, right? So, okay, if you never use your left leg and you're always afraid of this thing, ask her, what do you think is going to happen? And just leave it. Like you have to ask difficult questions and then be okay with silence and let them think about it. Okay. Because she might in the moment say nothing, but I can almost guarantee you she'll think about it. And the next session you have with her, she'll be like, okay, well, I want to do this for a while. Okay, cool. So I want to meet you where you're at. What's the smallest little thing we can do where we can like dip into discomfort, but not push you too far? And again, that's where you want to stay in that like part where they're a little bit uncomfortable, but they're not losing control, right? Like what feels doable to you? You just break it down. Maybe they're doing a step onto like a 3-inch platform and leading with their left leg, and then it's a 4-inch platform, and then it's 5 inches. Does that make sense? So it's the same principle. You just break it down to wherever people are at. So this thing of like in terms of principles, but you need the underlying thing there is to figure out what the motivation is, and to be able to ask. Like as practitioners, a lot of times we don't ask difficult questions because it's uncomfortable. But like with PN, that's like one of the things I've learned is like I'll ask one question, then I just like silence, and I just sit there and wait. And it like because it'll make them actually think about the thing. And some people, sometimes they're not ready. Like it doesn't, like you can't fix everyone. Like at a certain point, people are going to want it. When we think of like ambivalence and change psychology, they'd be ready, willing, and able. And sometimes some people aren't. That means that the pain of change is worse than what they're currently in. So they're not willing to make that change yet. And you can't change that for people. You can ask them questions. You can try to get them to understand, and elaborate and start thinking about it. And when they start thinking about that, helps them work through that change process. And so if you want some books, I would look up anything related to motivational interviewing. There's some simpler ones like motivational interviewing for fitness and health that are really good. Crucial Conversations is another one. It's not related. It's not like that based, but it's good for having difficult conversations with people and giving you a framework for how to think about them. But all of those are really helpful. But again, you just also have to set as a practitioner, like I'm going to do my best. I'm going to build my tool set. But at the end of the day, I can't do the work for these people.
What is your, because you don't really touch on it, and I guess in terms of like PT in this group, everybody's really big on the biopsychosocial.
Yeah.
I guess military and like veteran, and I just finished a book from a clinical psychologist on this of like PTS and things like that, is like within that community, I guess community in that group is huge, right? So I guess going through selection, I mean, not only do you have to have individual resilience, right, but you have to have those people around you. So I guess how do you utilize that within your training and then within your gym? If it's, I'm assuming it's more of like a CrossFit functional type fitness community like gym. So how do you utilize that in conjunction with those? Because if you don't have like the individual piece to it, obviously you're never going to start. But if you don't have the community, you may not continue.
Yeah, so it's just that sense of shared suffering that like that difficulty is not a bad thing, that it's something to be pursued. And so that's all times I ask that question constantly. People are like, oh, I have a really hard day. I'm like, okay, why is that bad? Like, is life meant to be easy? Like, are the things you're pursuing, like why? Or they'll be like, oh, that was really difficult, or that was really hard. That crushed me. I was like, why did it crush you? Tell me specifically. I want to know what that means. Like, unpack that for me. And then like, why was that bad? And so the way we've helped create that over time is by getting people who are more open to it to not having that dialogue, because a lot of times they associate a good workout with pain, and they think pain, they simultaneously like want to be beat up, but also want to avoid that thing, right? And so when we think of like military guys, they fixate on the quality of a workout has purely to do with how hard it is, especially in the special operations community, because that's what they're seeking out. Like, you're not a normal human if you're going to go try to do one of these things, okay? But that's actually easy, because you're just going to dissociate. Like, anybody can go crush themselves. Like, that's like my mental toughness story. It doesn't say a lot about you as a human being. Like, it says you have this one quality. Okay, great. So that's how I challenge them. It's like, great, cool, you're tough. That's it. Because do you think that's what's going to make you this really capable human being? Like, is that all you think that being a special operator in the military is just being tough? Like, is that really, that's all this requires? You can grow a cool guy beard and be tough. So that's where I like challenge people, like, hey, there's more to this. Like, you need to be an adaptable, capable human who understands themselves, who can learn and adjust quickly on the fly. And so again, that's that ability to ask those questions. So in the community, that's a lot of what I do, is like get people to start thinking about why they're saying the things that they're saying, instead of just letting it fly. Like, hey, great. Well, why was that a good workout? Tell me. Like, I want to know what your beliefs are of why that was a good workout. Like, what is your expectation going into this? And then we start to unpack that. And then people start to be like, oh, just because it's hard, it's not a bad thing. Again, I talked about that client of like bitching about stuff. She was the person who always showed up and was like, oh, like no matter how difficult or bad her day was, she focused on the things that she could control and that were good about that day. Like, hey, I'm at the gym, I'm around my people, I'm going to get a killer workout in. So no matter how bad or difficult the day was, I'm going to end it on a high note, right? And so that's how I orient people to those things. And you create this sense of everybody works hard, that they help like hold each other accountable to that standard. Does that make sense? And it's not just about working hard, but it's about like learning something about yourself, essentially. And that's a lot of what we do with the military guys, is like, we don't let them just go hard. So I have them, the whole goal for them is try to make, most people are trying to make easy things hard instead of trying to make hard things easy. It's like the easiest way to put it. So that's what I like challenge them on, is like, why is this hard? Why do you think that's hard? Is it hard just because your expectation is for this to be hard? Oh, because some things you're feeling some, like a sensation. Okay, I'm going to direct your attention over this way. And then you direct their attention. How's that feel now? Well, that's not that bad. I'm going to focus you on your breathing. I'm going to focus you on this thing. Great. So now that's not that bad. Now let's go to the next level. Like, now let's go a little bit harder, and I'm going to shift your attention again. I'm going to shift your attention again. And it's that skillful use of attention and getting people to break down these, like, understand how their mind's working. And then pretty soon they're doing something that previously was hard for them, and it's no big deal anymore. And that's that stress inoculation principle, staying right on the edge of their ability, but having them be successful. Does that make sense? So if I just break people down, like, that's the problem with CrossFit, is it gives people that endorphin high, but they're largely going into that distress, like fully automated. I'm not learning anything in the moment. I'm just literally performing, right? And so they feel good afterwards, but are they learning anything? Are they actually becoming more capable? So CrossFit is largely just this giant selection tool. And that's, unfortunately, that's things like most of the kettlebell places, like most strongman, powerlifting gyms, is they're just selecting for a bunch of underlying qualities that are already present. And if you have those things, you become more and more capable. And if you don't, then you just fall out. You just disappear from the community, right? And we try to do the opposite of like, it doesn't matter who you are. We're going to try to give you some of these underlying skills and build you up. But you have to have some of those avatars at the top that help that like when I ask those questions, the people who are a little bit more fit or been there longer, they don't shy away from them. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I guess.
So I know I went on a little bit of a tangent there. Sorry.
No, you're good. I guess to follow that up, how do you feel like the athletes that you train, looking at like their basic needs, right, of like security and like all of these things, do you think that is, I mean, because I guess the way I look at it is their needs are more met in terms of like most of them have been in the military for a little bit, right? They're secure, they have a job, like they have a place to stay, versus like a lot of our patients sometimes don't have that, right?
Yeah.
Like total insecurity for a lot of these things. So do you feel like maybe in terms of like those athletes and those people, that is totally different? And that's what I guess I was leaning towards, like in terms of like community, right? Like they have a community for the most part of people that are around them that will push them continually, even at, you know.
So not really. Most of the guys we train are civilians because we train them before they go in. So a lot of times they have contracts, but they're not yet in the military. They just have a contract to go into a special operations program. And I honestly pull them out of a lot of their communities. I don't totally dissociate them from them, but I want them to be able to do the things when no one is looking. And that is largely what they're screening for, because even when you're in the selection environment, that is what they're screening for. They're trying to tease out the people who do the right things when no one is trying to hold you accountable at all. That is 100%. They're going to put you in the worst spot possible that you can be in, and then see if you still do things the right way. And the only way you're going to be able to do that is if you've been doing it on your own for a long time, right? Like you can't be captive to needing like someone to show up and tell you. Now, again, I know you're that's one end of the spectrum. Okay. Now the other end of the spectrum is who you're talking about. They might not have financial security, or they might not have this, even though they might not even feel safe at home. And that's difficult to deal with for sure. So I think the main thing there, though, is still to give them a sense of autonomy and feel like they are in control of what's going on in your environment, right? The safer they feel when they're working with you, the more that's going to help them, right? And so that's where the more you ask questions about, I bet these people never get anyone to ask questions about their life, right? No one's ever interested in them. I'm not no one, but very few people, right? They're mostly in survival mode. And so the more you can build that connection, I think the more you'll get them to dig in and start thinking about these things.
Yeah, I was going to chime in. I'm really glad that you brought that up, Andrew, because I was thinking about that like immediately in terms of like the social community aspect, where like, again, the patients that I'm seeing are, to me, because they're like out of work, and eventually that immediately results in huge financial issues. A lot of them have childcare issues, like have to change their appointment times with childcare. So kind of going back, John, to what you were saying about like the stress being cumulative and progressive, and kind of knowing to manage that. Like, I don't want, like, I'm trying to find that balance in their sessions of challenging them physically enough, but recognizing that, like, you know, if they were up with their kids until 2 a.m. because their partner works like graveyard shift and they couldn't get childcare, like that just slows the progression. So it's not like to challenge or say it's like not possible. I think it's like, again, distilling it down to like kind of the lowest, like where, like versus like the 22-year-old dude in special ops who's like seeking that out because he's already, or she's already the kind of person that's gonna thrive in that environment.
Yeah, exactly. And so you're exactly right. Like you can't ignore allostatic load. Like it's a real thing. And so if they have a lot of these other stressors in the rest of their life and they don't feel secure, then you need, and again, that's getting back to that point of like stress of the SIT stuff of like they should leave there feeling successful. Okay. And so you need to challenge them only as much as they can be successful. And if they leave there feeling good about what just happened, they're much more likely to come back because they probably don't have a lot of that going on in their life. And if you're that person who helps them feel successful every time they come in there, that's a good place. And again, that's where you can orient people to like, hey, I know this is hard. I know that parts of this are going to be uncomfortable, but that's not a bad thing. That's what leads to growth. That's what's going to help you get to where you want to be. And I know where you want to be because I actually took the time to figure that out.
Do you ever train anybody that is coming out of the military? Like in terms of like, yeah, you train people to get to the peak, the pinnacle of wherever they're at. But do you train like veterans coming out that are, you know, maybe on that downhill slide, that are on that like, you know, the PTS route, the feel the lack of community coming out because that's what they had. Like, I guess, do you work with them and like, do you try to utilize the same things, or is it I don't know, a more sensitive type of approach to that because it is so, I guess, I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, definitely. I mean, if their experiences are traumatic enough, then they just need to go work with a therapist. Like if there's an underlying thing there that's, I'm not qualified to do that. I'm not going to play that game, you know, like, but yeah, we work with guys who are currently operational, and it's a difficult environment, honestly. Like the burnout rate is incredible. Like the structure, the way that most of these special operations groups operate, like their operational cycle, they just chew people up and spit them out. And I tell guys like going that in, like, hey, like you're going to ride this train for as long as you can, but it's going to fuck you up. Like you're not leaving this feeling good. Nobody leaves on the other end not beat up. That's just how it is. Like, and if you aren't okay with that, then you shouldn't pursue that path. It's the consequence. And Craig could talk to you about it, like some of the stuff from his, and it's not like PTSD or anything like that, just physiologically how beat up he is, or it was, and how long it's taken to restore some of those underlying capabilities. And some things epigenetically, you like check certain things and there's just no going back. Like it just kind of is what it is. But going to your point, yeah, I mean, you could definitely, we work with guys post-military, and community is a big thing, but a big part of that is we wanted to give people this internal locus of control. So I didn't talk about locus control today, but that's that sense of I am in control of basically my destiny and what's going to be happening. Okay. And hardiness is this other concept of commitment, control, and challenge. So hardiness is like I always feel committed to the things I go through. I feel like challenges are a good thing, and I feel like I have control over my life no matter what. And again, even in environments where you don't have any control, like if you read like Holocaust survivor stuff or war story survivor, like people in the worst situations humans can possibly be in and imagine, well, the people who make it through that display those underlying qualities regardless of situation. It's the same. Hardiness is predictive of being resilient to things like PTSD, even in things like medical practitioners and other things, professions like that. So it's across the spectrum of humans, it's one of those underlying qualities. And so it is one of the things that we orient people to a lot. And it's plastic, so it's trainable in nature. It's not a fixed quality of who they are as a human being, okay? A lot of these psychological traits are very trainable. And the same thing is with locus of control. That's so someone who thinks that like, I need this external community. It's not that we don't all need people. We need relationships. You need that quality thing. But a lot of people have been in the military. They just show up and do the thing. And it's really hard to transition to a life where no one does anything for you. And that is much more difficult for a lot of these guys. Like they've been catered to, especially if they were special operations type guys, like, and then they get out, they don't have a community. No one's telling them when to show up. No one's telling them how to behave. No one's telling them how to do any of these things. And in their head, they're used to being the man, and now they're not. They're just another person. And that's difficult for these guys. And so that is definitely one of the things we talk to them a lot about, and get them to use those underlying qualities that they have that made them so capable in that one area of like, hey, you're going to have to rebuild, but in the same aspect of life over here. So it's the same way, like we just have to use the kind of growth mindset, the things that allow them to be really capable. Like if the guy, like, you don't want your peak to be when you were 25. Like, this is the next stage of your life. So now we're going to figure out how to apply the things that made you really awesome here in this part of your life. Does that make sense? So in my book, we talk about locus control, hardiness, and some of the other psych stuff. And that would all apply to these people.
Yeah, that makes sense. I actually have your book right here next to me. So yeah.
Cool. So, and we talk about that in the book. Principles are the thing that people like to take away from all the stuff we talk about. Like, because if you get into the nitty gritty of the science, it's going to be wrong in 10 years. Like, a lot of those things are going to be, or not wrong, but like partial truths, and we'll have more clarity. But the principles of most stuff, we went to a lot of pains. Like, when like 6 fields are saying the same thing in a different language, then the principles are probably universally true. And that's why we talked a lot about systems theory and chaos theory, because those general principles are principles of all of science and just complex systems in general. And so if you take those and apply those to whatever domain that you work in, then you know that you're going to be generally successful. Whereas a lot of practitioners are fixated on the other end. They fixate on methods, and they think that whatever the most recent research is, that is the truth. And they're going to look like idiots in 20 years because it's always an incomplete knowledge. Whereas if you focus on principles, knowing that your methods are going to change over time because your methods are susceptible to bias in the air and the process of scientific knowledge, then you're going to be a much better practitioner because you're going to be able to understand the things that really matter, the big picture things, and not get so caught up in the nitty gritty. Like, that matters, that helps you be good, but that's going to be constantly changing. Anyone else?
Might be it.
All right. Chris, what about you, man?
Questions? I do have a question that I just was thinking about with, your private facility going through COVID, how you reacted to that from some of these principles, and then like having conversations with your clients who like are obviously very committed to the facility, but then they're going through shit as well, like financially and psychologically. Like, if you feel comfortable, can you talk about like how you were able to, I don't know, keep a gym alive during the past 12 months and then having those conversations with other clients?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, the main thing is that we wanted people to feel like the gym was going to be like a hub for them to help them get through that difficult time. And so even if they financially couldn't afford it, that there was no pressure on people. And we made that like really clear from the get-go, was that if this is a financial thing, then you're still going to be welcome here. That this shouldn't go away because you have enough other stressful things going on in your life right now. I think that's the main thing. And then when people show up, they need to have like a good experience. So it's just allowing people like the space to, and this is the way all our training always works, is that we're always giving people permission to modify things based on how they're feeling on a day-to-day basis. So it's like not the antithesis of a CrossFit gym in the sense that like the workout is programmed and everybody's got to like burn themselves in. Like, yeah, we generally want people to work hard, but we're also really aware of body language and things of that nature. And when people are not having a good day, we make sure and go and talk to those people and figure out what's going on and make sure that they can get through that and have a really good experience, if that makes sense, Chris. So I think the main thing was just having people have a positive experience, that community they could go to. As coaches, we oriented it to not letting people, because humans can kind of get into like bitch fest and talk about how bad everything is. So instead we tried to make this like the best thing of their day on a day-to-day basis. And if they had that positive thing to like anchor to, and again, the last thing is just the relationship aspect. It's like not letting people kind of fall through the cracks. So we spent a lot of time talking with a lot of people, texting people, staying on top of people, not letting them ghost on us, essentially. And then when they did, because like most people's expectation is when they're not doing well is that other people just disappear in their life, right? And if you just stay persistent and then you're sure that you actually care about the things that are going on in their life that are difficult, and listen to them and aren't judgmental and don't try to provide solutions, but just listen, then oftentimes we found that it would pull people back into the community, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does. That's awesome. And I think for me, the biggest takeaway I had when working with you and seeing kind of the environment you set was like, everything's kind of at a middle ground of like, you shouldn't be emotionally like super charged every session. And it's like, there is that sense of community and feeling like excited for each other. But it's like, if you had a hard training session, like you said, like it's not that big of a deal. And I think that like ability to not react, you know, overreact to these situations was very powerful in at Ethos, because it's like people are crushing it, but there's not that sense of like, it's an occurrence, like it happens, move on and go forward. And that's what I really appreciate, especially like dealing with school or things in general. It's like, if you have that mindset of like looking at it, like, as you said, like you understand you're stressed, but move forward with it and adapt. Yeah. So I definitely noticed it in the environment at Ethos and what you said there.
Thanks, Ben. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the general principle, is always try to make hard things easy. And even when it is difficult, how do I make this the least stressful thing I can possibly do, even if it's objectively difficult?
Yeah.
Like, and if you watch any high level performer, like watch Michael Jordan, it's like no big deal. Everything's no big deal. So they're able to replicate like the practice experience in the game. They're not trying to replicate the game experience in practice. And that's the main thing that people screw up when they think of performance, is they're trying to amplify their stress response. They're trying to get super amped doing everything. And that's not the key to success. The key to success is managing external stimuli and not letting it take you over. Like if you say like a really good public talker, presenter or something like that, they're like super cool, right? They're not stressed out. They're not getting amped. And that's true in almost anything when it comes to performance. So it's just managing that stress response. So that's what we try to foster with people, is like, here's how to manage yourself.
Yeah, for sure. Does anyone have any more questions? If not, we can call it.
Oh, and we're currently out of books. We're out of stock for a little bit. We will be, we sold out. So we're going to do another print run, and it's going to be like a little bit, we're doing like version 2 of the book. So it'll be expanded upon. Yeah, it actually will come out on Kindle, but not, so it'll probably be like 6 weeks before it's done. It's up and ready.
Sweet. Thanks, John. This is great, man. This is a nice change of pace compared to looking at a paper, and seeing this like niche population that you work with, but also how broad it is and how you can apply it to, like you said, Gen Pop, military, etc.
Yeah, and if you are interested in the research, like if you pick up the book, we cite everything within the chapters. So you can definitely take a look at any of the research. It's all there.
Solid. All right. Well, you enjoy the rest of your weekend, and thanks everyone for joining the party.
Thanks,
All right.
guys.
Adios.